Hello and welcome to my Veteran Asylum Sanctorium Interrupter guide. This guide is meant for beginners who wanna get into interrupting, who wanna take on the job, take on the responsibility of doing so. We're gonna go through gear that you can use, we're gonna go through the skills you should use, and in the end I'm gonna showcase on a video how you can actually do it and handle the certain specific mechanics that you have in the trial. This build is usable in both +1 and +2. I've done both as an interrupter on this character. It is very survivable, it does decent damage while interrupting. It has infinite sustain through dark conversion, and it makes you quite tanky, so you can take on some damage and not die. Alright. Let's go through the gear first before we go through the skills. What I have here is, as you can see already in the corner here, I have Ice Heart 2-piece, one with a magic enchant, one with a health enchant. I like the little bit of additional health, but you can also put another Magicka enchantment on here. This set is a lifesaver. It is used in harder content quite frequently now because it absorbs like a very, very significant portion of your damage. Of the damage you take, so it can rank up high up to 35% of the damage can be absorbed by simply using this little monster set here. So this is very helpful if you want to survive, and it has a little bit of a damage component. The one piece is spell critical, which is always nice to have, so this is very good to use. In more advanced groups you can of course drop this if you feel safe enough that you will not die at some point, but I still run it. It's just too good not to have it, in my opinion. The main 5-piece we have is something that is quite uncommon these days in PvE. It is Toruk's Pact, and this is also a really nice set for, especially for Asylum, because as you see on the 2 to 4 piece we have spell damage, which is always welcome. We have additional health, which makes you more survivable. We have 3k spell resistance, which is especially in Asylum very helpful, because everything in Asylum Sanctorium is magic damage. So you can take out all the points out of hardy, out of physical resistance. It does not matter. All you have you can put into magical damage. So we're gonna get to that later. The 5-piece is interesting. It decreases the weapon enchantment cooldown and increases the potency by 30%. This has several advantages besides making you tankier. We're using, as a main hand weapon, we're using an Asylum's Perfected Inferno Staff with an absorbed Magicka enchantment. This is very important because you get a shit ton of sustain back through this absorbed Magicka enchantment. As you can see, it restores 600 Magicka per hit per proc, and it can proc with Toruk's, and infused it procs every 1.4 seconds. So basically every crushing shock weave you do, or almost every crushing shock weave you do, will proc this enchantment. We're using infused for the same reason as Toruk's. Both of them empower the enchantment and improve your sustain. We use the Asylum's Perfected Inferno Staff because this applies status effects to the Saint Lothis, which means that in this build you will almost have a constant uptime of these 3 status effects, increasing your and your group's damage against this boss. And it also, through the proc of Chilled, it also reduces the damage that the boss does, so this is very helpful in multiple ways. So the main 5-piece on the body is Toruk's Pact. You can basically choose whether you want to use 5-1-1. You can also use 6-1 as I do, or 7 light, or 5 and 2 heavy pieces if you want to be a bit more tanky even. That's completely up to you. The 3 jewelry pieces are Moondancer. Moondancer is coming from trials. You can also use willpower here if you do not have Moondancer. But if you have a perfected Inferno Staff, you should have that. Now you could say that, yeah, I'm trying to get into Asylum Sanctorium and you tell me that I should use the Asylum's Perfected Inferno Staff. There's an alternative setup that you can also use. It uses Mechanical Acuity or Skating Mage on the front bar. So use 3 jewelry pieces of either Mechanical Acuity or Skating Mage, and an Inferno Staff on the front bar of either of these sets. You will not get the Burning, Concussion or Chill status effects on the enemy, but it will have the same effect otherwise. You can use Crushing Shock to proc either of these sets more reliably. Acuity procs quite often, and also Scathing Mage does. On the back bar we also have Infused, but here we have a Fire enchantment on the Maelstrom Lightning Staff. You may well ask, why lightning, why not fire? The reason is that in Asylum you can use the Lightning Staff to track down where Lothis will spawn, will port. He's porting away every 20 seconds, and if you put a Lightning Staff heavy attack on him, the heavy attack will tell you the direction that Lothis is porting, so you can focus him faster. That's the reason why we're using a Lightning Staff on the back bar. But you can also use an Inferno Staff. It's all doable without a Lightning Staff if you want to get a bit more damage on your blockade. Alright, this is the basic gear that we have, so either Perfected Inferno Staff and 3 pieces of Moon Dancer or Willpower, or you can also go 5 Scathing Mage, 3 Jewelry and the Inferno Staff, or Mechanical Acuity because it's craftable, it's easy to obtain. Ice Heart can be obtained through Diafrost Key, which is also very easy to get. Torx Pact is also crafted, so most of the gear here is quite easy to obtain. Even if you do not have a Maelstrom Inferno Staff, you can also put a regular Inferno Staff or Acuity, Scathing Mage, whatever on the back bar. It does not matter too much, because your main focus will not be DPS, it will be providing group utility and interrupting the Lothis boss. Basically we covered the gear. We can you can use, instead of Torx Pact, you can also use the Phoenix set. Phoenix gives you a free death every once in a while. Let me just see if I can show you a piece. This set is coming from Imperial City, so you have to farm Telvar or buy it in stores, and this basically, it has a 10-minute cooldown, but instead of dying you become immune to negative effects and healing for 3 seconds, and then you heal for 17k health and explode for flame damage around you. The damage is not really important. What's important is that you basically become immune to dying every 10 minutes. So if you die and you use this set, you do not die and instead revive after 3 seconds. So this gives you a freebie every 10 minutes. You can either use this as a main bar, as a main set, or also put it on the front bar only, because that's the bar where you're gonna spend most of your time on, because then you do not waste as much DPS as with using this on the body. Alright. Skills. Skill-wise, this is not a mainly damage-oriented setup. This is basically all about group utility. You're basically an off-healer that also interrupts and has infinite sustain. The first skill, which is a lifesaver, is Empowered Word. I'm not using the Hardened Word. This basically gives recovery to all your allies around you. Minor intellect is something that other classes that are generally used in there do not have access to. Templars would have to slot Repentance, and Nightblades, for example, would have do not have access to this at all. So if you cast this shield, it's gonna put this buff on any ally within 20 meters, and 10% recovery is nice to have in there. The second one is the most essential skill of this whole build. It's Crushing Shock. This is your main spammable. This is what will interrupt the boss whenever necessary, and it will also put status effects through the Perfected Inferno on the enemy, or proc Scathing Mage and Mechanical Acuity very reliably, because this has 3 initial hits. Together with a light attack, it's 4 initial hits, which can proc either of Scathing Mage or Mechanical Acuity, and every second hit of this will put status effects on the enemy. The next skill is something I put here because it's just very nice to have as utility for yourself, because it heals you. It's a heal on demand, and it restores Magicka for the consumption of stamina. You do not use a lot of stamina in Asylum Sanctorium. You do not have to dodge roll, break free or anything, so you may as well use the stamina to get some Magicka and life out of it. I use this whenever I have time between interrupting, when I need sustain. Technically you can use blue food in this build and just use this more often, but for safety we're still gonna go with Clockwork City Food or Witch Mother's Brew. The next skill is something that is basically making you an off healer. If you see that other people are on low health and they do not get healed, or cast this preemptively a couple times within the kite, so people do not die, this is the Twilight Matriarch. As you can see, this heals itself and up to 2 other friendly targets for 7k health. This can crit, this gets amplified, this is very strong. And it has a 28 meter radius, so it has quite a high radius, and this Matriarch is ranged, so it will mostly stay around the middle of the arena, so it can reach a lot of targets that could use some healing. In Asylum Sanctorium, this pet does not die anymore, it does not take any damage, so this is basically free, and it also does damage every 2 seconds with a light attack. The last skill is Bound Aegis. You can either slot this, or you can use Inner Light if you do not want to use spell power potions and want to use something else instead. It basically doesn't matter, the difference is 1% Magicka, but this one also gives you Minor Ward and Minor Resolve, which makes your resistance quite high. As you can see here, I have 20k spell resistance, 10k physical resistance. The physical one doesn't matter really, it's just the spell resistance that matters to me. If we put on an armor debuff on the back bar, for example, and put that on, we have 23k spell resistance, 24k on the front bar again. It is just very, very nice to have, and makes you a bit more tanky, and also gives you a lot of Magicka. And if you know that you're gonna take a lot of damage, you can cast this, block, and increase your block mitigation by 36%. The ultimate on the front bar is Shooting Star. This is basically just there to give you 2% max Magicka from the Mage's Guild passive that we have here, the Magicka controller. This is not actively used most of the time. You can also use it instead of a Destruction ultimate, but the arena in Asylum Sanctorium is so large that the Destro ulti is just better most of the time to actually hit the mini bosses as well as the main boss. So this has a smaller radius, but can still deal quite some nice damage if you know that bosses are stacked properly. Going to the back bar, we have Crit Surge. This is your main heal. I use Crit Surge because I use spell power potions. On a max orc you can also use Power Surge if you want to use immovability potions for higher health recovery, but this one is not giving you major sorcery, but it instead it increases the healing you get. You can use either morph, it does not matter that much. I use this one because it just provides a bigger heal compared to the other one, and I get the major sorcery through spell power potions anyway, so I do not really need the major sorcery from this skill. This is your main healing ability. It provides a lot of healing per second. As you can see, it can heal you once every second for 2.7k health. This can also crit, so it's a very nice heal. Next we have 2 ground dots. One is Liquid Lightning, it's a 10-second dot, very strong, one of the strongest ground AoEs in the game, and it provides conduit synergy to the tank. This is very helpful in more advanced groups. If you want to proc Alcast reliably, you want to have a Sorc that puts this conduit onto the main tank, so the main boss gets hit and the tank can proc. The conduit synergy, which deals damage, but the damage of the conduit synergy is not important in that case, it's just about increasing the Alcast uptime. The third skill is Blockade of Storms. This is basically this is a bit another ground AoE, another very strong one. It provides off balance as a lightning staff. This is not really necessary, but as I said before, the lightning staff is just used because then you can beam enemies, beam Lothis, and see where he's porting when he's every 20 seconds. Then we have the Matriarch again. This one has to be double barred, otherwise it will despawn. You can also use other abilities instead if you do feel like you do not need the healing, but I found this to be a very, very nice off-healing group utility thingy. You can also use Crystal Frags on the front bar instead. If you do not like pets, you can put Haunting Curse for a bit more damage in. You can also use the Volatile Familiar to get more damage per second and more AoE in. So you're basically free on what to use in these two spots. I like the Matriarch. In non-advanced groups and advanced groups I mostly either switch to the Volatile Familiar or I put the Execute on. It depends on the situation and on the group. The last one here is Boundless Storm. This is the minor armor buff you can have. In my runs I mostly do not use this because I do not feel like I really need it. You have quite high magical resistance, you put all your CP in there, so it's actually quite hard to die on this build. As you can see, I have 18k health unbuffed, so I'll get minor toughness and Add-On on top of that, and I'll be easily above 21k, and it's quite hard to die with that amount of number. So this is basically the the skill layout that I have here, and the last skill is the ultimate. This is Thunderous Rage, the Destruction Staff ultimate. Let's just despawn this pet real quick so it stops attacking the dummy. This is the main ultimate that we're using, so we're saving this for situations where the mini bosses are stacked on the main boss. So usually in Asylum what you need is burst when the mini bosses are there to kill them as fast as possible. You are always going to focus on Lothis, but as soon as you see that he and the melee boss are stacked on the main boss, you want to drop the Destro ulti to burst them down as fast as possible. You do not always kill the bosses immediately when you can. Sometimes it makes sense to delay the kill if you have time. So yeah. In the end you need all three sorcerer skill lines, you need the destruction staff, you need light armor, medium, heavy, all the passives in here. You need the Mage's Guild. You can also use the Psychic Auto skills if you want. You can use Channeled Acceleration, Elemental Weapon. The build is basically free on what you use, but Crushing Shock is the main element you have to have. We're gonna get through the interrupt mechanic itself later on. I'm gonna explain when to interrupt and how certain mechanics can be handled when interrupting Lothis. CP wise, you can find the CP on Fear Turbo's site. Mostly I put everything in spell resistance, I put everything Elemental Defender, Thick Skinned, Ironclad. These are the main CPs. I also have some in Quick Recovery to get a bit more healing and increase the effectiveness of my damage healers, because I do not use Hardened Ward, I use the Empowered Ward, and my Magicka through Toruk's Pact and Ice Heart is quite low. I only have 37k, but this doesn't matter too much. You're gonna have, through the pet, it's gonna increase your health a little bit more. The Magicka is not gonna be that high, but this doesn't matter too much because you're gonna get you're gonna get quite a bit of damage either way. As an interrupter, do not think you can deal as much damage as the rest can, because your main purpose is interrupting the boss, so you have to think more as a group support, in this case as a main DPS build. Race wise, anything is fine, but Altmer is currently the best. Breton is also very nice, they have better sustain. You can also use Argonian if you want. It does not matter too much as an interrupter, you can use any race you like, but the Magicka based races make most sense in this case. You also need Alchemy here. Alchemy has to be leveled, at least in medicinal use. Passive has to be full, because then you can use the full effect of potions. The last point I want to go through here is add-on setup, because if you want to interrupt Asylum, it is very important that you set up add-ons in a specific way if you can. For console players this is of course not doable. Console players have different issues in Asylum, so if you're on console and you want to get into interrupting in Asylum, you basically have to figure out another way to introduce counters that do what these add-ons do for you. So what you want to have is Asylum Tracker. This add-on is a very nice one for Asylum Sanctorium. You can basically enable and disable any notifications. You can, for example, you can let it and have it announce Storm the Heavens, the kiting mechanic, Defying Blast. This can be very nice. it can announce projectors, it can announce anything you need. But there's only one thing you definitely have to have for interrupting, and this is the oppressive bolts. What this does is it puts a counter on of 12 seconds, which counts down, and then you're gonna get a notification that you have to interrupt as soon as Lothis starts his oppressive bolt mechanic. So this one is very important to have. I sometimes I also activate the defiling blast one, because that is really annoying, because sometimes you cannot see it when you have to block and stuff. It's quite annoying, but you also have a timer in the other add-on that we're gonna use that also tells you that. So this is the first add-on. You can customize it to your liking, you can change the color and stuff. I usually only activate the oppressive bolts because by default everything here is activated, so it will just flood your screen with notifications, which I do not like, so I usually disable all of them other than oppressive bolts. For the rest of the notifications I use Asylum Sanctorium status panel. This is another add-on that tracks basically anything, but it is not as prevalent, not as, yeah, let's say annoying as the other one is if you have everything enabled. So these are the two add-ons you really want to have. You also want to use, I usually use a buff tracker somehow, minus surrender. You can also use ability duration, action duration reminder, or buff timers. All of these are doable. Combat metrics can also be helpful to measure how much DPS you're able to do. Raid notifier doesn't really do a lot in Asylum, but you can still activate it to see. So usually what I do is, what you want to do is you want to tap target the boss. So whatever button you have that on, you need to have that in a range that you can activate easily, because you definitely want to keep the Lothis boss always tap targeted. The main boss and the other mini boss have very large hitboxes, so a lot of times when you don't tap target the Lothis boss, you might hit one of the other ones, which you do not want, so it can be quite annoying. I think we covered everything gear-wise and skill-wise, so video I taped for this is taken from a very basic +1 run. It's a random group I joined because they needed an interrupter. This run didn't go particularly well. We finished it, but everything that can go wrong was going wrong in this run. So this basically shows how you can perform interrupting even if you're in a non-optimized group that doesn't know 100% what they're doing yet. So this is meant for people who want to get into interrupting, who want to do it without actually having done it before, and who just want to get some guidance on how you can handle certain situations that may overwhelm you in the beginning. Alright. Starting with the video, I fast forward a little bit from 100% to 90% because there's not really anything happening there that's interesting for us. The boss will start jumping at 90%. After that 90%, he's gonna do the first Storm the Heavens, so the first kite mechanic you have to do. And as soon as that kite mechanic is over, the mini boss will spawn, Saint Lothis, the one that this guide focuses on. Lothis is always spawning on the same location around the arena, so it's always in the back here. Mini boss is there now. He's gonna port away. It's random. In this case he ported to the same location he was actually at before, so it didn't really change his position. And after 12 seconds within the fight where Lothis spawned, we need to do the first interrupt. The timer is already at 17 seconds because he did the blast before the interrupt, but be aware, after 12 seconds he will try to do the interrupt, so when that is happening, spam Crushing Shock on that guy. Now we're gonna, we see that in the middle there's a new timer that spawned. It's a blue and red one that says bolts in the middle. This one is the most important timer for you, because this shows when Lothis is gonna do the oppressive bolt mechanic that you need to interrupt. So it will count down from 12 to 0 and then switch to bolts soon. Usually what I do is at 1 second of this timer I start spamming Crushing Shock. He's not always gonna do the bolts as soon as this timer is on 0 or on bolts soon. Sometimes he does other mechanics in between, so if he's doing the blast before, then this will be delayed. So when you see that he's doing the blast, you can wait like 1 or 2 seconds and then you can start spamming Crushing Shock on him. It all depends on the mechanics that are surrounding him. So this is the basic, the most important countdown that you have. We're gonna go through the other numbers on the screen now too, because then you see what is important for you and how you can interpret the numbers that you have here. The next one is gonna be the green one you see on the top left corner right there. This is the blast counter. So Lothus is gonna do the cone attack, like the cone-shaped blast on a random person within the group, and he's gonna do that every 12 seconds. Unless he is doing something else at the time. This can be important for you because if this number is above 12 and the other one for the interrupt is 2, then he will most likely do the blast first and then the interrupt. This leads us to the second counter on the top left corner. This is also an interrupt counter. We are not using this actively, this is just coming with the Asylum status panel, so we're focusing on the middle one. The third small counter, the white one, is the port. So every 20 seconds he will port away to one of 4 positions within the room. It can be either left or right from the main boss or on the opposite side. There's 4 pillars in the room, 2 on the exit side and 2 on the entrance side, and he's going to port in front of these. So every 20 seconds he's going to port away. This is important because it can collide with the interrupt mechanic. So if you have this porting away timer on more than 20 seconds and the interrupt timer is also on more than 12 seconds, or it's already telling you bolt soon, then he might do the interrupt, the oppressive bolt mechanic right after he ported away, and this is basically the most difficult thing you have to handle, because you have to locate him as fast as possible and interrupt him. Now it can happen that you might not be able to interrupt him before he gets off the first shot of oppressive bolts. This is usually not that big of a deal. 1 shot is easily survivable, even in +2 if people know what they're doing, and you can announce I can't interrupt, dodge, block, whatever. Technically you can use a lightning staff to try and see where he's porting, but that doesn't always work reliably, so it's quite difficult to do in many situations. So for the beginner guide here we're going to focus on simply getting to interrupt him as fast as possible. Here in the video you now see that the boss is down, so he is off for 45 seconds, and the timer is also telling you that as soon as he gets up again he will do oppressive bolts. It's always the first thing he does when he revives, so you need to, as soon as this time drops to a few seconds, you need to be aware of that and try and locate him, stay on him, focus him, and interrupt him as soon as the timer hits 0. Generally, as an interrupter, you want to stay somewhere around the center of the arena. This is because, as I said before, the boss is porting to 4 different locations every 20 seconds, and in order to be able to reach him reliably, you need to be somewhere around the middle of the arena. That is also why interrupters are usually put in position 4 or 5 on the hard mode diagram that you have here. This starts with 1, goes over to 8 to the opposite side of the arena, and interrupter is usually 4 or 5. Because then you can reach all 4 different spots where Lothus is gonna spawn. The next important part is the jump mechanic from the boss. As you may well know, at 90, 75, 50 and 25% the boss is gonna start doing his jump attacks. So from where he is, he's gonna jump over to the other side of the arena, then back, then jump again and jump one last time to the original position where he was, if the tanks are doing it correctly. Often you have to interrupt while he's doing that, and this may be a problem because if you go either to entrance or exit, you cannot reach the boss when he's porting away and when you have to interrupt him. So you have to even then stay somewhere around the arena. And as you can see, I usually alternate between the two sides where the boss is jumping, so I'm always going on the opposite side, because then you take less damage. But even if you take one, you can shield up and block, and usually you have enough health on this build to survive it, and enough Magicka resistance, so you do not die even when he hits you. Last but not least, we have that fire mechanic starting in the execute phase, so after 25% after the jumps, the boss is gonna add another mechanic to the ones that were previously there. So he's gonna do these fire AoEs 3 randomly around the arena. You always have the two sides and one big AoE on the entrance or the exit. This is one more reason to actually stay around the middle of the arena, because that allows you to again reach the boss reliably and avoid the fire mechanics more easily, because then you can either simply just run left or right depending on where you have to go. Interrupting in Asylum, especially in the hard mode, is not an easy job, because you have so many mechanics stacking on top of each other. You can have the blast and the kite at once, you can have fire stacking with these mechanics, you have the melee mini boss that also jumps on people and puts AoEs that maim you on the ground. There's a lot of stuff you have to deal with, so it can be overwhelming in the beginning. Make sure to always tap target the boss, the Saint Lothis, because the Saint Olms has an incredibly huge hitbox. It is really annoying, and especially when the boss ports away, the tap targeting system often doesn't give the right target to you. Also make sure that your team knows what to do when you cannot interrupt immediately. Use a code word, bolts or oppressive or something else that shows your team that they need to block or dodge roll the first bolt if they cannot handle the damage. But generally, if people die to this mechanics, it's not always your fault. It's often people not paying attention to this oppressive bolt mechanic, because sometimes it's literally impossible to interrupt the first hit, or it comes down to RNG which direction you face, so it's not always 100% doable. So thank you guys very much for listening. I hope this guide is helpful to you guys, and feel free to comment down below the video if you have any questions.